Okay, we are going to get started then. Hopefully everything works. Hi everyone, I am Diana Dorr. I am the Certification Director and Legal Consultant here at the Indiana State Library, and I am currently recording at the Indiana State Library. I'm going to hope that we don't hear background noise. There is a conference room near me and it's being used, so people will walk by my door. Hopefully it stays quiet. We'll see how this goes. Um, Again, I'm the certification director and legal consultant. As a lot of you are saying hi from wherever you are, I recognized your names. Most people have contact with me for the certification side, but we do also help libraries answer the occasional legal issues. So there, I have seen some of you that way. Lisa Meadows is helping us with the webinar and Zoom process. If you have a sound issue, it is most likely on your end, so don't put it in the chat. If we have a global sound issue, we're going to be aware of it and we'll try to fix it. But do note that if it's on your end, this is being recorded, as you heard, and it will be posted to our YouTube page. And you'll get a link to it afterwards so you can watch it again. Sylvia Watson, who is my boss, is watching the chat and she's gonna help out. She will answer questions if she can, or she will bring them to my attention if we have wider issues or see a question repeatedly for me to answer. So feel free to use the chat, but I'm personally not monitoring it as we go through this. So there's that. Today we're going to be talking about the new ADA website compliance rules that the federal government has outlined and will go into effect either in 2026 or 2027, depending on the size of the community that you serve. And I'll get to that rule in a second. The reason we're doing this is the best way to describe some of these issues. They are pretty complex. I spent one summer in my law school experience as an ADA intern for a different state agency here in Indiana. And so I learned a lot of these. That was my whole summer, was learning these rules and trying to help implement them. And a lot of these examples and discussions, I'll say, come from things I had experienced and saw, or just best practice policies. So there is that. I'm going to discuss some things that might be what brought you here today, but it is actually way too complicated for me to go in depth with it, and I will get to those in a second. So without further ado, here we go. Maybe. There we go. So I just introduced myself. The first thing I'm gonna go over, what is the ADA, or the Americans with Disabilities Act? WCAG, which is how I pronounce it. Don't know how it's technically pronounced, but it's how I'm going to say it. Sorry, everyone. And Section 508. New rules for the public entities, so the actual government rules they have rolled out. How to review your own website for your library, and then my tips and takeaways. So first thing, what is the ADA? The ADA is the Americans with Disabilities Act. It is a federal law, actually only passed in 1990. It's one of the civil rights type laws, but it's what's considered the last one to be passed. And it prohibits discrimination against those with disabilities in everyday activities. The Department of Justice, or the DOJ, is the group that actually oversees the administration of the ADA in all of its forms. And according to the DOJ, a person with a disability is someone who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity, has a history or record of such impairment, such as the cancer that's in remission, or is perceived by others as having such an impairment, like someone with burn scars or other just physical things you can see. The ADA is not for constant illnesses that are around all the time. It is even for temporary issues such as a broken limb. Pregnancy actually gets you some protections under the ADA, which I think people forget. Temporary vision or hearing loss, those things declining. But the ADA is for everyone, is how I always described it. The ADA is actually then broken up into 5 sections of protections based on the organization that it could apply to. So they've attempted to cover as many bases as possible. These sections are called titles and correspond with the section in the federal code, or the FRCP, which is what the legal community calls it. Title 1 is the employment section. Applies to employers that have 15 or more employees, including state and local governments, employment agencies, and labor unions. Title II is the state and local government services. So this is what libraries could be more familiar with. This applies to all services, programs, and activities of state and local governments, including public education, courts, and public libraries. There is a subsection in Title II that is about public transit, making buses and those things accessible. Businesses that are open to the public, businesses and nonprofits serving the public. This one trips people up because they don't realize that even if you're a private business, you do have to apply to this because they think they're not public. Doesn't matter. You have to follow the rules. Title IV is telecommunications. And the general requirement when this was created in 1990 is telephone companies must provide services to allow callers with hearing and speech disabilities to communicate. This Title IV is not where the new rules are falling under. They are under Title II, but Title IV is very outdated at this point because it just has not caught up, and maybe it'll change eventually, but as of right now, it is literally just like telephone lines. And Title V is other important requirements, and it's just a kind of odd catch-all section, and it just is, I think, about 3 subcategories that don't apply to any of the other ones. But we are focusing on Title II today because most of us here are public librarians or someone working for a state and local government whose website now needs to be compliant. For public libraries, the ways that you may have seen this before is doors and walkways have to be the correct width for a wheelchair or other device. If you did not know that that is a rule, there are actual rules, and you may have to go and measure your stacks in your library. I have had to do that with office spaces at a state agency and see if a wheelchair could fit through. The answer was no, they couldn't, so that was fun. Braille signs for rooms and restrooms at the correct height. Can't just be a sign with raised lettering. It does have to have specific rules. The Braille does have to match. They have to be at a certain arm level. Also have walked around a lot of buildings in the state and measured those with someone one time. That was, I don't even want to know how many steps that day, but that was a lot of signs. Desks and chairs have to be specific heights to fit wheelchairs and other mobility devices. Policies that allow service animals. Accessible materials for those with low vision or hard of hearing. That's always things that we see a lot. And handicapped accessible doors on all items. Website requirements, there are currently none, but as the whole point of this this webinar today is discussing the new guidelines that are being rolled out. As a side note, if you believe, I'm going to note this because I've said this to people before, if you believe you have an older building and you have an exception to the ADA and being grandfathered in, that's actually not true. And you do still have to follow the ADA. You were just given more time when it was originally made, but every space does have to be accessible. So that's one thing I have told people, and they're like, oh, I don't have to do it. Unfortunately, well, fortunately, you do. These accommodations help everyone. The wider spaces help more patrons be able to be in the library stacks. Automatic doors help those we all know with our arms full or carrying other things. Service animals help a lot of people. So it's not just for those with disabilities, it does help everyone. So the next part, the digital side, WCAG and 508. These are the rules and guidelines, and this is going to be the most confusing part. When I was the ADA intern for a different state agency, my boss was actually she was visually impaired. She had a seeing-eye dog. And so this is what I spent the summer studying because that agency had actually gotten in trouble for having inaccessible websites by state people. And so I was her eyes helping her learn all these things and go through it. So that's when I can tell you, when I say they're kind of a lot and kind of confusing, I do mean that. There's a lot of videos and a lot of things, and I'm trying to break this down for you. So WCAG stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and they are set by the Web Accessibility Initiative, so not the government. It is an independent agency. They have just adopted these rules because they're the best rule. So this is what the federal government is using as the rules and guidelines for web accessibility. They're very in-depth. They cover quite a few things. It's made by web content developers and people with expertise in this area. So there's a lot of that. WCAG is primarily intended for those content developers. but web authoring tool developers, web accessibility and evaluation tool developers, which can mean it's occasionally confusing because it is at this more level if you need to know sometimes digital things in coding, but it is still understandable for the layman. But as anyone can be a web content developer, we do all need to know these. WCAG is currently on 2.2, version 2.2, and that was updated in December of 2024. The version that you will be required to meet is not 2.2, it is actually 2.1. So that's kind of nice. You're not stuck to the new standards. It is the older standards. They're very similar. WCAG 2.2 has 13 different guidelines. The guidelines are organized under 4 principles, which are: is it perceivable? Is it operable? Is it understandable? And is it robust? So can you see it? That's perceivable. Can you interact with it? Is it operable? How do you interact with the web guideline? Can you click it with a keyboard? Do you have to use a mouse? Different standards like that. Is it understandable? Can everyone, is it written at too high of a level? Is it written too low of a level? Is it leaving information out? And is it robust? And is it covering everything? So those are the standards, and then it's broken down within those. Perceivable and operable are the biggest subsections of these. Robust is kind of small, but there's that. Within these guidance, there are then 3 levels. There are A, AA, and AAA standards. So it's what level you want to hit, which is then confusing. So if you want to be super great, you have to hit the AAA standard, and you're covering all the bases, you're doing great things. A is you're covering most of the things that they want people to do, and A is you're doing the bare minimum. So the success criteria are what determine conformance to WCAG. That is, in order to meet WCAG, the content needs to meet the success criteria, and they have very specific details in this. If you are like, well, what is this going to look like? I'll show you on a screen in a second what it looks like on their very nice and interactive web page. I just do not have the time to do that. It would not be more than an hour. It would be more than an hour for sure. It would be probably a whole conference to go through every single WCAG guidance and see what it is. And that is why I'm going to recommend that towards the end that you form a committee and you have people individually go through this and learn these standards and then maybe teach others. I unfortunately just don't have the time for that. So as I said, this is not a WCAG training. It is recommended to have a designated staff member or to learn about it. I'm one of the designated staff ones here at ISL, working with some of our tech team and others to make sure our websites do, because we also need to double check ours. If you want to watch the webinars, this is a subtle plug for my other job. If you want these to be earned as library education units, you can turn those in for approval and I will probably approve them for you. So people don't feel like they're doing this for no reason, or they're not getting reward, or you have people do that. There could be limits on that. That's going to be how many people turn it in and what I have to decide, but just note that that is a thing. The tool I have linked there, which I will send out this PowerPoint and it will be linked other times too, is super handy. It's a quick reference guide and it breaks down like what you have to do. The other 2 slides I have in my notes, I will also make sure it ends up in the PowerPoint. There's also links to the WCAG website, so you don't have to go hunting for it, with what standards you should be looking at. Okay, and this is the other reason I said I don't have time to go through that. This is me pulling a few things that are of importance, and this was only on page like 2 of the guidance, so I didn't even get that far through stuff. But some very basic things that WCAG covers includes making sure all non-text, so all pictures, all videos, has alternative text that serves the same purpose. With some exceptions, there is a way you can just say this is decorative or that, but everything has to have alternative text. So those who are using screen readers can understand it and are not missing vital information. Making sure all videos and audio options have captions and descriptive text. The descriptive text is the one that I've seen throw people a lot before. They're like, oh, it has closed captions for those who are hard of hearing. You also need descriptive text for those who are visually impaired so they can follow all aspects of the video, especially if it's like a training video or how to use something. The sequence has to be correct so a screen reader can be used to understand the proper format. One of the things, if you've never interacted with a screen reader, and I do have a video later that'll hopefully work, that shows the difficulties with screen readers, in that is if you don't have it in the correct order, it jumps and you're missing information, or it just makes no sense. What I have in my experience seen as the one that gives people the most issue with screen readers is PDFs, and it's one reason I massively dislike PDFs. They're very hard to make accessible in the first place, and even if you do try, screen readers don't always like them. They jump around. Again, my previous employer, one time she got sent a PDF from someone within the division knowing she uses screen readers, and it didn't work, and she had to send it to me, and I had to translate it for her. So I had to tell her what it says, which is not fair to her, not fair to anyone, and it's just kind of annoying all across the board. It's a lot of extra time. It could be very important. So making sure things follow the proper format and don't skip around is very important for accessibility. Color should not be used as the only visual means of conveying information or showing a visible element or prompting a response to an action. So that's if you put a hyperlink, you can't just have it in the blue highlighted text. You need to say what it is, and it's like this link to X, Y, or Z. I did not do that in this slide, so I broke my own rule here, which is why this is difficult, because there is so many rules to remember. You shouldn't just highlight important text. Don't put it in specific colors. Don't italicize. I will say that later again too. And also, again, jumping ahead, I have some slides to show you why you shouldn't always do color. This is hard for a lot of us. I'm a color coder myself. I have a million colored pens. My planner, everyone has a color. But just for digital and web access, don't do that. It really stinks to say, and it can be hard. Text size has to be able to be resized up to 200. If you're one of my web people watching this, I know this is one of the ones that can give you a lot of issues. So, yeah, sorry, that's not my rule, but this is for people with low vision. You still have some just need to be able to blow up the text without it being grainy or missing information. The contrast of text and images has to be at least 4.5 to 1. That's hard to, the numbers don't make a lot of sense, but there are specific contrast functions. There's online contrast checkers that you can see if you're meeting these. And again, I have an image that later that'll show you what that exactly means. All functions have to be able to be done by a keyboard. They can't just rely on a mouse. That's in case someone can't grip a mouse or can't click, but they can, use a keyboard, or again, screen readers and verbally telling things where to move your mouse. Can't have flashes. Enough time to read material before being prompted to move on to the next thing. You have to have what teachers like to call wait time, which for a lot of us, if we read a lot and very quickly, can be harder because our level of wait time is a lot faster than others. And all language has to be written on a 5th grade level for the general public. That can be very difficult when we deal with legal terms. Trying to put them online, trying to have those understandable for everyone is difficult, and it does not always go well. But those are some things that do have to be accessible. And that is just a small portion of the list. And I think I actually cut like 3 more things that I was going to put on here, but there's a lot. This is a screenshot of what just 2 things on it look like. You can see, if anyone's gonna be able to see this, off to the side, text alternatives were only, here. In these first 2, it goes forever. I did try to screenshot the whole page, and it was over 5 pages of text. So there's no way you were gonna be able to see all of it, even in just one screenshot for a PowerPoint purpose. But it is a lot. It does then have the techniques. If you can see, it'll have full description. I've linked this in it, and I will link it again in an email afterwards, but these are very, very helpful. But these are the 2.2 guidance, which we will not have to follow, and I'll get to that. They do have it for the other levels also. Oops. All right. Section 508 is not part of the ADA. It is part of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which is probably most famous for if you have children or you are an educator. You might know what Section 504 is, which is accommodations for schools. 508 is in the same, it's just 4 sections later, it's in the same act, and it was added in 1998 to make sure electronic and information technology was accessible to people with disabilities. So this was the first kind of round of things. The law is 29 USC 794, and it applies to all federal agencies. So it actually does not apply to public libraries. Why it's kind of confusing when I'm going to include this. When they develop, procure, maintain, or use electronic and information technology, technically this does only apply to federal agency websites and trainings, and it is way less extensive than WCAG. But the reason I mention it is it has really good trainings linked on that 508 website. And it's very short little trainings on how to make a Word document accessible, or how to make this accessible, or what this looks like. As someone who's watched the PDF one, that one's rough, I'll tell you that one. But this is very helpful, and it could be a starting point for reviewing your website, and looking then at federal ones as examples, possibly. This is run by the U.S. Access Board, so not the ADA, not the Department of Justice. It's a different subsection. But I just find it very helpful, and this was the first round of guidance before they've chosen to adopt WCAG. Okay, why do these matter? WCAG matters. It is now the new standard required by federal law, and it allows all patrons to have access to your website and materials in an equal and accessible way. 508 does not officially apply, but it was the guidelines for federal websites and often used by states prior to WCAG now being adopted. And both sites also help understand how it may be difficult for those with various disabilities to use your website. Because you haven't had an interaction with it or someone with one of those disabilities that's now being covered doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And these will help you understand and give examples of what it's like with or without these changes. If you have a patron with low vision, which is very common, especially if you have an elderly population or just anyone, there's a lot of vision issues. They are going to need something with higher contrast so they can see, the ability to blow up their text. They might need a screen reader to read things to them, and they need to know what the pictures are if they are important, and know cues of when to click to turn the page or follow the link or do those items. Those with limb issues, such as a missing or broken arm, are going to need to be able to navigate the website with the keyboard and not with the mouse by like fully clicking, because it just may not be possible for them. Those who are colorblind need to be able to see. I'll show you what colorblindness works, what it looks like if you've never seen it or experienced it yourself. And then adjustments to help those with both long and short-term disabilities. Again, any of these disability rules aren't just helping those who have to deal with this daily for their entire lives, but those with short-term disabilities, and it helps everyone to begin with. So, what the federal government has said with these new rules for public entities. And I'm using the term public entity because we could have people watching this who are not librarians or other people, but this does also apply to state, local governments, your like county page. Any of these pages do have to follow these rules. So on April 4th, 2024, so almost a year ago, the Federal Register published the Department of Justice final rule updating the regulations for the Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act. The final rule has specific requirements about how to ensure web content and mobile applications, this also does apply to your apps, are accessible to people with disabilities. State and local governments have the following timelines to comply. So, if your state and local government size serves under 50,000 people, you do not have to comply till April 26, 2027. Special district governments, which that was very vague, and it was kind of confusing on what it meant. Ignore that one for now. I'm just copying this from their website. And if your population serves 50,000 or more persons, it has to be compliant by April 24th of 2026. So the easy way, if you're an Indiana librarian watching this, if you are a Class A library, which for our standards means you are serving a population of 40,000 or more, pretty much think that you need to be ready to go by April 24th of 2026. Now, I am very aware that some Class A libraries serve less than 50,000 people. So this was a generalization, but that's going to be my rule of thumb is if you're one of our bigger libraries, our Class A libraries here in Indiana, you need to be ready to go by next year, unless you know you serve less than 50,000 people. But then you'll have till 2027. But look at your numbers. We have your numbers, but you should also know what's your population you serve. But yeah, there's that. These can be done early. It just has to be at minimum done by the time required. So that's why we're doing this now, to give people enough time, especially if you're a smaller library who may not have as many time resources as the larger libraries who could maybe hire this to be done. So the general rules they are adopting WCAG 2.1, so not the latest version. And the middle level, or level AA, is the technical standard for the state and local government's web content and mobile apps. So these have to meet WCAG 2.1, level AA. There are some very limited exceptions, such as thing as old documents posted on your website before the rule took place. So before 2024, that's what you have to remember. If they're being created like right now and you're going to post them to your website, it does have to meet the requirements because you know about these rules. But if they are older, like if it's something COVID related from 2020, doesn't have to meet these rules. You could update it if you want to, but you might not have the time to. If you have third-party content where the third party is not posting on your website due to licensing, a contract, or other arrangements, you don't have to worry about their stuff. So if you have ads popping up, or if you have other things, that is not covered by this. But if you have a contract with like, say Livy or Overdrive, it would have to meet those standards because you have a contract with them and they have to do that. So with that kind of rule, you can see that the federal government's also dragging other companies into getting everything accessible, because there's so many different contracts with different entities and they do have to follow the rule. Individual password protected documents. So if this was a very odd exception. If someone asks for something and I think their example was like a power bill or a water bill, and it's for that specific client, but it has identifiable information, so you password protect it and send to them. That doesn't have to be accessible because it's not accessible to the wider world. But I'm gonna say, speaking to librarians, we probably don't have a lot of individual password protected documents that need to be made, but it's kind of the odd exception. And again, old social media posts do not have to meet these exceptions, but current and oncoming social media posts do have to also meet these rules for WCAG accessibility. So if you're posting a picture to Instagram and you have a caption, you also then should probably put a description underneath your your cute little caption that you do on Instagram that says this is a video or a picture of the back of kids' heads as they attend a children's program at the library wearing funny hats or something like that. So describe what the picture is for those who are using it. There are some examples of that of disability advocates and people who have adopted that on social media platforms I have seen. So things like that can be helpful to everyone. Okay. As I said, WCAG 2.1 is not the most recent guideline. That's 2.2. But they feed into each other. So going to the most recent rule of 2.2, which has that breakdown I showed earlier, could save you time because they could adopt it. They're super similar. Like it's occasionally like wording just being slightly changed, not even the rule being changed, but like that. So if you want to use 2.2 and just cover your bases, that's always a good rule of thumb. Better to be over-prepared than under-prepared. Level AA is the standards of the mid-level of WCAG. Again, it's not the highest, so you could aim high to be covered, but you need to shoot for that AA standard, and it is listed on the website as you go through it of like what's each subdivision for one. Sometimes I've looked at some of the AAA standards and they can be really hard to reach. So if you're like, I can't do that, I will also, my favorite one, and I was showing Sylvia this, and hopefully this can also be an example. Microsoft products, if your library has a license with them or your entity does, already have accessibility items built in. So you can go up top and you can do accessibility checker and it'll tell you all the issues you have with it. I ran this PowerPoint through it. I think I only had one thing that didn't pass the accessibility checker, and that was an embedded video that it wanted captions for. It'll help you, even like it gives you AI captions for pictures if you want to use that. But a lot of these tools already have built-in accessibility checkers, which can save you a ton of time. Others are free on the internet, and small changes can help build the bigger ones that will help in the long run. Your webmaster may have already made your website compliant, but I would make sure your social media is also compliant and just double check your website just to cover. If you do not follow the rules, you can be in trouble with the federal government, or you could actually be sued by a patron for inaccessibility. So the rules do need to be taken seriously. If you're like, well, no one uses our website, you'd be surprised. People do. I have seen lawsuits taken up by them. I have, watched the government gotten audited or gotten in trouble or hand slap. They haven't really said what the rules will be for if you don't comply, but just know that you could technically be in trouble. You're probably more likely to have a patron complain than fully get in trouble, but it can be escalated. All right. Do we have any questions that I need to answer now, Sylvia?
We do have a few questions that you haven't covered yet. We could, if you're ready, we can go over those.
Mm-hmm.
The most recent one is somebody asked, since you just talked about this, the social media posts, adding the description underneath the caption, they're wanting to know, is that a requirement or a suggestion? And I kind of wonder, can screen readers read like the metadata of the pictures such that the description could be, like, I don't know how that works in social media.
To my knowledge, they do not read the metadata.
Okay.
So you would have to put a caption describing what the picture or videos are a little different, but you would probably need to say like, this is a video of this, even though they could hear. But yeah, the caption is one of those accessibility things. It doesn't, you can actually, if you have an iPhone, this is a hint. If you have an iPhone, I don't know about Androids, sorry everyone. There is a way you can actually turn on accessibility functions. And so you could probably see if it does read the metadata for it on a social media post. I've actually never done it. I just know it's an option. It's labeled as accessibility in your settings. I was shown this again by my former employer. So that's one way to see if it does do that and give a better answer to that question.
Yeah, Daniel said, the same person that asked the question said that social media providers have accessibility features built in. So like you were saying, maybe they can just toggle it on and see if it'll read a description of the picture so they can see if they need to include one separately. Susie is saying, where do we access the tools to help keep us in compliance? And I think you said you included the website link that tells them what they need to do. And
yeah, okay. I have the Department of Justice links of what they said. I'll have the WCAG links, some of them are embedded in the slides which were shown, and then others are in my notes, so they'll make it into the PowerPoints and the email I'll send out afterwards.
Okay, somebody asked earlier what you recommend instead of PDFs, and you kind of already talked about Microsoft. So is that the better alternative, the Microsoft Docs?
Yeah, if anyone's interacted with me with certification, I've switched LEUs to Microsoft Forms because those are actually accessible. I have heard them read by a screen reader. I have had others tell me that they are accessible for keyboard shortcuts. So I'm a big Microsoft Forms fan. A lot of people at State Library know me for this. But Microsoft products are good. You can also convert Microsoft to a PDF, and it forces you to run it through the accessibility checker to do so. So actually this PowerPoint and the ones I've done previously for my other webinars actually have to go through that step before it'll convert it to a PDF for me. So Microsoft, yes. I think Google's the same. Google Docs can be a little wonky though, so.
What about marketing emails? Do these rules apply to marketing emails that they send out to patrons or just the web and app?
If it's on a website, that counts as web accessibility. So if it's an email, that it does have to be compliant.
Okay, and somebody, this isn't related to the webinar, but somebody was asking about window sign guidelines. I don't know if you have time to talk about that.
That would be window sign guidelines, and anything physical space is on the ADA website. And if you want to send me, I'll have my email at the end of this. If you have questions about that, I can send you links to those. But those give dimensions and specific things. It's the same for, I think Sylvia and I, we've had to measure a desk here at the ISL actually, and I had to look up those requirements for it. So if you want to check your whole library for physical space items also, I can show you where those links are.
I think that's it for now. I think we're caught up. There's been some discussion in the chat about the social media stuff, but I think we're caught up.
Yeah, the problem with social media is it's included in it, but the DOJ in their ruling has not been super specific. So super helpful, love that. But I'll try to clarify that more. And you might just have to go through the WCAG guidance because I believe they also do have specific rules for social media. Again, it's not a WCAG training because it's going to take too long, but that's an option to look through.
Somebody's asking, before you move on real quick, somebody's asking about digitized newspapers or digitized pictures that they've put on their website. Somebody else has said they recently redid their history pages, but there's a lot of old pages and PDFs. Didn't you say that anything that's already on there, they don't have to go back and make accessible?
So if it's older stuff, you don't have to do it, but starting forward, everything would have to be accessible now. So anything new being posted, which I know is a lot of work. I see some of the historical documents being changed. Of course, I have a fire truck go by. But yeah. Is that, I'm sorry if that's not super helpful, everyone, but yeah, it does have to be covered technically. Okay, I'll do more questions later. So these are some pictures and images I have shown to show examples of what they mean by what needs to be fixed. It sounds a lot more complicated for some things than it is. I'm gonna see, hopefully I have a video that works. If not, I will send out the video because I'm afraid my sound might not go with it. So there's that. All right, so when it says those contrast guidance, which were 541, this is what it means. So the image on the right shows why a contrast level must be a certain level. These do fit the high contrast, which is 541. You see white with black text and then black background with white text, saying 5 boxes, wizards jump quickly. And then to the left of it, or yeah, to the right of that, it says it's grayscale backgrounds with gray wording. And it's a lot more difficult to read and would not fit those contrast guidelines. High color contrast is not just black and white. It can also mean white on blue or navy on white or other color combos, as long as it would fit that high contrast, you can see it. But you can't do, as the very far right shows, that like gray and gray on the lighter colored backgrounds. My thing I always say with this is I have near perfect vision. I actually forgot to put my glasses on for this. I think it's over 2016. I wear readers just because I read too much, but I have issues seeing those grayscale ones. If you can see that, great, but that does not mean everyone can see these. If you have low vision, if you have older adults, I hate to tell you this, but once you hit a certain age, you will probably need readers. It is like a thing. I know a lot of people in the eyeball world, so it's going to be a thing. And so having that high contrast is going to help everyone, not just those with disabilities. And this image comes from Colorado State University's Accessibility by Design, which also has other web pages that you can go through. I found those on a Google search. This is one of my little pet ones that I always tell people. When you're making a color choice, try to stay away from red or green because it is the most common color blindness color scheme. I did get on the last agency I worked for. They had a lot of stuff in green, and I was like, hey, people people can't see that. Just because you can doesn't mean others can. So this is not an official specific requirement. It would just fit under the color contrast rules and is just a good rule of thumb I like to include. Color blindness can affect many people. Also, if, like, you can be born with color blindness, or you can get it from a brain injury, or other items. The image shows different tomatoes, and you see the one highlighted with green underneath it, which it shouldn't be. It says normal vision, and it's a gradient of yellow to like green and red to dark red tomatoes. The next picture shows deuteronomality, where you can't see red as much. Everything looks more yellow. It's kind of just this odd color. Then you have protanopia, which is you see all of the reds as greens, and then tritanopia, which is you see all the greens and yellows as red. So that's just what people who do experience color blindness would see. There are some people, of course, you can only see in black, white, and gray, but red, green is the most common, which always makes me giggle for why are stoplights red and green, but you know, that's a different thing. So I just suggest, even if this is very difficult, if it's your library's colors or it's that, it's fine if it's your image for your library or like a picture, but I would suggest not doing your text green and red or green or just red, because it's very difficult for those to see, and it would just, it's not fair, essentially. Okay. Oh, okay, my website might go. All right. So the video to the right is an audio demonstration of why making all documents accessible is important to those using screen readers. It'll read a bad document and then a good document. If your website or documents do not flow correctly, those using a screen reader will be unable to read them and properly, and would possibly have to have someone else review and document and explain exactly what it is, which is not the point of accessibility. They have to be able to do it on their own. PDFs and fill-in forms are some of the worst culprits for these screen reader issues. That's why I said I don't like PDFs. I'm a very PDF person. I know that's a me thing. Microsoft Forms does actually fit with these. So, all right, Sylvia or Lisa may have to tell me if we can hear this, because I don't know if I'm sharing my sound. If not, the video is linked and I'll also send it out because I'm running a little short on time. No. Can we hear that?
No, you would have needed to check the box when you shared your screen to
Okay.
allow sound.
Okay, then I'll just send it out to people and you can watch it and understand. There's a lot of other videos on YouTube. I just forgot I had to share sound with this one, so sorry everyone. This was where I didn't know. No, don't do that. Don't do that to me. I promise I know some technology. All right. The next one is keyboard accessibility. And the picture to the right is from a website where you can actually test keyboard accessibility through it, which is very handy. A lot of these things are free online, so it might seem scary and like, oh my gosh, I have so much to do. And while yes, you can check it through free things online, which is handy. So you have tab often moves the keyboard focus downwards through the website's interactive elements. Shift and tab would reverse the action and move it upwards. Enter or return clicks on links or goes to press buttons. A spacebar would check or uncheck boxes, help you press buttons. And then the arrow keys helping you scroll up and down the page, help you choose one option from a set or help you move through those. And if you're like, okay, well, that's cool, but if someone's visually impaired, how do they know the keyboard operations? If you did not realize, your keyboards have little dots on parts of them. Specific, not as much laptop keyboards, but other like external keyboards have dots and visually raised things on them. So if you're low vision or visually impaired, they actually know based on where those dots are, what keys they're touching, or they could get a compatible keyboard to them. But there are, even very basic ones are already required long ago to have some raised dots on them to help people out. So that's how they know where those are. I have also linked yet another YouTube video to show how to test for a keyboard accessibility. This is an easier one to cover, but it is one that can be forgotten. Fonts is another, not actually in the WCAG, but it's in 508, which should be considered when reviewing Fonts can be difficult to read with those with vision issues, young readers, or those with reading disabilities like dyslexia, which is where you flip the letters, or Erlen syndrome, which is where it looks kind of like wibbly wobbly is the best I have description of it. Font size in section 508 is suggested to be at a 12-point minimum for documents, 16-point minimum for large print documents. Headings should be larger than the body text. That also helps with the navigability of screen readers. They'll say like they know it's a heading. And more visually prominent, and presentation should be 20-point minimum. Presentation one is hard. I had a hard time fitting this presentation at times to 20 points, so I finagled it. I understand that it's difficult. For the 12-point minimum from documents, I am a Word person who loves size 11 font for some reason, so I get it. It can be difficult, but this is the best to help those with accessibility. Font choices that are better for people with low vision or other issues are those that are sans serif for body to help with those with low vision. And these fonts are be Arial, Verdana, Tahoma, Calibri, Century Gothic, and Open Sans. Times New Roman, not super accessible. I know people love it, but it's not. I will say like Arial and Calibri are presets for your Word documents and your email of like what it just automatically goes to. So when I say Microsoft and other ones just automatically will do some of these things for you, they actually do. But now if you're building a website, it may not be the go-to. What these fonts do is they're not tilted, so they help people keep everything in line. And sometimes they're heavier on the bottom to help those who flip words or have swirly words not read it. Be careful with italics for emphasis, as it's difficult to read for those with low or other reading issues. And screen readers don't read italics. So if you're trying to emphasize something with italics, the screen reader will not pick it up, which stinks if you've done certain citations where you have to have it in italics. It's like, all right, doesn't really do much for everyone, but there's that. All right, so now I've inundated you with a bunch of information and you're like, how do I do this? What are we gonna do? This is gonna take so much time. You may only have a year. Here are my suggestions for what I would do. So you can either follow these suggestions that I have, or there are companies that are reaching out to people and offering their services. If you have that in your budget, they will fix it for you. If not, it is not totally out of the realm that you can do it yourself. I know if you have a Weebly website, I saw people on the listserv like 6 months ago talking about this. They actually reached out to me too, saying, oh, we'll offer our services to make this compliant for you. I had to tell them that we are a state agency. That's not how we do contracts, but that's a little different. You could use one of those. There's no harm, no foul if you do. It is possible to do on your own though. So the first thing you're going to want to do if you're choosing this method is to review if you already have a compliant website and your materials, or if you have a specific person in charge of it in your library. If you have a webmaster, great. Loop them in on this. If they're not watching this and you find this helpful, make sure that they go back and watch it. Just take a glance over your website and be like, oh gosh, we've got this. It's got all these colors. We don't have alternate text. Be like, okay. The next suggestion is to form a committee or a group to learn about these WCAG standards and to be able to apply them. It's a lot. There's a lot of standards. There's a lot of little sub things. You've got 3 subsections. You have to look at what the rules the Department of Justice wants, what WCAG standards actually are, and then you have to learn what these mean in practice. So make sure this group goes in depth and learns the changes and watches the videos. It can be a lot and so occasionally boring. Occasionally overwhelming, especially if you've never encountered it before. But that is my suggestion, is to form a group of employees who would like it. My second step would be, now we're going to do an in-depth review of your website and make note of what changes need to be made. I would prioritize that list of, okay, this is the most glaring, this is not compliant, we don't have captions for pictures. This is my favorite one to say, if you possible, get community members who need these changes to help review and provide input. Or if you have a way or can find free ways to use the technology like screen readers they would use to understand what it looks like or sounds like to them, as your website stands as it is. If you know someone who uses a screen reader, one of the most prominent programs is called JAWS, which is very expensive if you have it. So if you have a community member who uses that and is willing to help you out for feedback, have them run it through, see if it makes sense, give them feedbacks. When I've had to do website stuff before, we made a Microsoft form. This is how I know it's accessible, because we had them check the form first, be like, can you read this and understand the form? Does it make sense to you? And then they went through the whole website for us and gave us some feedback on what we needed to change or what was weird or couldn't be interacted with. So if you don't have that option, that's okay. It is just, if you have that option, or if you have a group willing to help you, it is super helpful, because then you can understand really what it sounds like and looks like on their end. Step 3 would be have the committee make notes about what changes need to be made to the websites and social media and plans for implementing these changes. Week by week, small changes, month by month, small changes, so you can get to that full compliance without it being an all at once deluge, because that's overwhelming for anyone. And then I would make a list of the changes and rules that apply and send it out to all staff to make sure they're aware, because sometimes you have other people who do library websites. I know I share a website with like 5 or 6 other people. So I need to cue them in to make sure, like, hey, if you update something, make sure it fits this. It may not look as pretty, but this is a requirement. Or if there are people who would make a document to go on the website, just clue everyone in. Well, the one thing I suggested before is to just practice it, is to suggest to everyone using those accessible fonts in your emails as a practice, to try to do it if you make a Word document, just so you see what it's like and you're used to it and it becomes your default. That's including in your signature send off, which I know a lot of people love to have a colorful signature at the bottom of their email. Maybe practice not doing that, or not having the like picture version of it, because that may not be read by a screen reader. Small steps like that can be really helpful, and that just becomes more normal. 4 and 5 would be make a timeline of when changes would be made to go into your required date of compliance. For those larger libraries or larger entities, it's going to be a lot faster than those who are smaller and have 2 years of time. Start with the bigger changes first, such as screen reader accessibility, because it's going to take a lot longer, keyboards, Zoom functions, and other functions, and save those little smaller, like piddly things is my family's term for it, those little itty bitty things that can be annoying after you get the bigger things done. Make sure you make the changes by the compliance date. Review using technology that can be used by those with disabilities to make sure it's usable. Just so you know that, okay, we've done this, we've done our due diligence, it's good on our end. And then step 6 would be make sure all web and app content is accessible by the date required of your library entity. If not, you could be subject to discipline by the DOJ or a lawsuit by someone for not being accessible, because they probably know their rights, and so they know what needs to be done. That is my recommendation. Again, you can hire someone, not always in the budget for everyone. I'm not sure how much they charge for their services, since we did not contract with them. But if you do it slowly, if you form a group of librarians or people on your staff who are willing to help you, it will be a lot easier and more breakdownable, I guess, than other ways. All right. So that's the end of my slides, but I will now take questions for the next few minutes, if we have any.
Well, we've got a few more. One was, are Google Forms as bad as PDFs, or have you had a chance to look and see how Google Forms are with accessibility?
Past couple of jobs I've had have been Microsoft only, and I haven't had access to Google Forms, so I don't know off the top of my head. I would assume they're better than PDFs, just by virtue and nature of it. But I think almost anything is better than a PDF, to be completely honest, but that's mine. Yeah, it's been about 8 to 10 years since I've worked for something that has a contract with Google that's allowed me to use Google Forms, so I can't tell you that off the top of my head, unfortunately.
Okay. Are there any rules related to using all caps?
Not know off the top of my head,
Okay.
but I would be very careful doing that. Always. Just can look very shouty.
There are a couple of questions about social media, like adding descriptive text for social media. So one person said, well, what if you have like a slideshow? Do you just put a general statement about what the general composition of the slideshow is depicting versus trying to describe every picture in the slideshow? Somebody else says video descriptions can be lengthy, and some social media platforms restrict the length of your posts. So would it be your opinion that they can just use a fairly generic statement describing, if it's not something where the images are training them to do something, if it's just kind of, oh, there are people engaged in various activities in the library, could they just use a generic descriptor like that so that they're not?
I believe they can be more generic for the video descriptions, but I think I just didn't go in as depth of it I think it's in both WCAG and the DOJ rules. So I would say I should probably look into that more, but I was just kind of using it as a passing example of it is something that we also need to note. So that would be something your committee might want to look into to be more specific, because I think they can just be more generic, but you would need to investigate what the rules actually say specifically.
Okay. I think that's about it. I guess the only one that really, somebody says they scan newspapers. Do they have to, they can't, if they're scanning newspapers, they're not gonna like repeat all the text in the, I don't know, in the captions. So are those normally readable by screen readers, or do you know?
It depends on how they're uploaded. I would guess if they're scanned in, if they're like converted to a PDF, it would depend. I think if I recall from, this is 2 years ago now, that my previous scans have problems with being read by screen readers because it just thinks it's an image. I feel like the DOJ webinar that I watched had something mentioned about it, and I'll also send the link. If someone really wants to watch the Department of Justice webinar that they hosted about examples of it. It's about an hour, and it could help, but I am not sure about the older, because that's like a weird older documents rule. But if it's being newly posted, it should be accessible. By their rules, how it's worded. So that's kind of the difficult issue with libraries.
So they'll have to figure it out if they're posting scans of newspapers, basically.
Yeah. I don't know that off the top of my head. I would have to look into that more and double check.
And then somebody's asking again to clarify things that are prior posted in PDF form. They don't have to go back and make accessible. And I think you said that's correct a couple times.
Correct.
When implementing web sliders, is it acceptable to use a flat image with alternate text for accessibility? Or do sliders need to be built using interactive elements like buttons or areolas to ensure they are keyboard navigable and accessible to screen readers? That may be too in the weeds. I don't know if you had.
Yeah, that would be, I don't know what you mean by that.
I don't
I'm
either.
not the webmaster here. But if it's like something you have to click and drag, yeah, it needs to be a keyboard accessible. It can't be a click and drag. It has to be able to like arrow key through it, if that makes more sense. That's my top of the head, but that would take looking through the WCAG rules and more investigation on your end.
Okay. All right, I don't think there was anything else. And we are about at time anyway, so.
Yeah. All right, Lisa, if you would like to stop recording.